The good old 9 to 5. Man, we had a good run, buddy. The 9 to 5 is dead. Now it's a trap for people to get sucked into and suffer for a majority of their lives. The 9 to 5 used to be a great way for people to be productive, make an honest living, and live a pretty comfortable life for them and their offspring. But with greedy corporations, rising inflation for the last 100 years, and an insane housing market, the dream of the white picket fence is no longer achievable for the average person. Back in the day, you could buy a decent home and afford to live comfortably with a minimum wage job. Obviously, you couldn't enjoy the luxurious lifestyle, but you could still afford to pay your mortgage, put food on the table, and raise your kids with minimal issues. Nowadays, people that work minimum wage jobs can't even afford to put gas to go to their second job, and still that wouldn't be enough to pay their rent, let alone a mortgage, because there's no way in hell you are affording a mortgage with a minimum wage job today. You would be lucky if you could afford groceries without having to go into debt. Now, I'm 27 years old, and growing up wasn't too bad for me and my low middle class family. I had a pretty decent childhood. I always had food to eat, so I'm grateful for that. And I was able to play video games growing up because my father was able to buy them for me and my siblings. It's even crazy to think how video games used to be $40 for a PS2 game, and now it's damn near $100 for a digital copy of a PS5 game that you technically don't even own. Anyway, my dad is a cab driver, and don't get it twisted, he was always working when I was growing up. I'm talking like 24-hour shifts sometimes. He was never home and barely slept, but he made enough money for his family to live comfortably while my mother was a stay-at-home mom, which is crazy to think because something like that in today's economy is impossible. Now, granted, this is 20 years ago, but still, it was once possible to live like this, and that's just 2 decades ago. My first job was in high school when I worked at Gap in one of the malls in my town. It was a calm job. I was the only dude there, so naturally all the women would talk to me and sometimes flirt with me. Safe to say I had absolutely no complaints at all. This job, of course, paid minimum wage, but this was back in 2015, and so I could actually make my money stretch for a very long time. Now, I've worked multiple jobs after that one. I worked as a delivery driver for a logistics company, for Amazon. I worked for Scotiabank, and then more recently I worked for Xero, which is a cloud accounting software company. Now, I was doing sales for Xero, and it was work from home, so I cannot lie, it was a cozy situation until I got laid off last year because the company was doing bad on a global scale. Since then, I've been focusing on trying to make money without the 9 to 5 and taking care of my sick parent. I realized even when working that cozy job that it's just a trap. I mean, if you're working minimum wage, I know most people just understand that it's not the move if you are trying to thrive. It's a great stepping stone if you're starting out, but I'm talking about a career. Most people won't want a minimum wage job as a career unless they have no other option. But even with the higher paying jobs, like my sales job, for example, it was good and I was making decent money at the job. Not over 6 figures by any means, but for someone that lives at home with his parents, it was decent enough for me to save a good amount of money every month. Now, you see, the problem with that is that it sounds great on paper. You're making money, working from home, and you have enough to save and whatnot. But if you display loyalty to these jobs, don't expect the same back because 90% of the sales team got laid off, and I was one of them. Now, I was not loyal to the company at all. Honestly, I could have cared less because I always had an entrepreneurial mindset since the 11th grade. When I realized that working for someone else is just not the move for me, so I always knew that I wouldn't be there for a long period of time. But a lot of my coworkers spent a lot of time and energy at their job at Xero, and they were completely devastated when they got laid off. Now, this is just one example of why the 9 to 5 is dead. People are job hopping, and kudos to them because companies will treat you like trash the second they don't need you. There are so many slop jobs nowadays. Basically, these are jobs that don't actually produce anything productive, but simply a way for corporations to avoid taxes at a larger scale. For example, a lot of these consulting and quote-unquote project manager jobs are complete bullshit. If you ask most of these people what they do, they could not give you a sufficient answer. Now, I ain't hating on these people working these jobs. Kudos to them for making money for doing jack shit. I'm just here to call it out for what it is. They expect you to work this job for 40 years and barely be able to live comfortably. It's basically modern day slavery. But at least back then, people knew they were slaves because they were subjected to abuse and straight up control. But nowadays, people think they are free, but they are far from it. Keep slaving away and barely making ends meet while the top 10% are kicking their feet up in the Maldives or some shit and laughing at all the working class people. Now, it sounds like I'm being very pessimistic, but it is the reality of today's society. What was once a normal thing to be able to live a comfortable life just working a normal job has now become you must be in the top 20% in order to live the same way. One thing I will say is that there are so many opportunities to make money nowadays compared to before. So even if you have an inkling of motivation and drive, you can really make something of yourself without having to work a dreaded 9 to 5 to do so, which wasn't a thing back in the day. The internet is probably the world's greatest, but also the worst invention. It has made it possible for people to make money from the comfort of their homes or wherever, as long as they have an internet connection and a laptop and computer. But it also has created things like social media, which I believe is a net negative for society. With all that being said, even though things may look bleak right now, there are many ways to make it out. So let's focus on the positives and keep on hustling.